sure that we get to them and we have enough time for questions. So our first presentation is coming to us from Aaron Lofts and Adam Cross, and they will be doing a budget presentation. Aaron is the Superintendent of Business Services and Treasurer of the Board, and Adam is our Senior Manager of Financial Services. We'll let them get through their presentation, and then we'll go ahead and conclude by answering questions. So if you're ready to go, you guys, take it away.
Thanks to you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to meet with you today. I'm going to share my screen right now. Hopefully everyone can see it. Can everyone see it now? It's just a title page right now.
Yep, all good.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
So I'm going to start with kind of building off our presentation we had back in June. So if everyone remembers, which I'm sure everyone doesn't because we've been through a lot in the past few months or so, we were late getting the budget this year. And the reason that we were late getting the budget, normally we like to have this presentation done a lot earlier to the committee, was because due to COVID, we didn't receive all the information for our regular board budget until after, towards the end of June. So around June 19th, we received the budget information from the ministry. Now you might think, well, you have a few weeks to get that ready and such. Well, just put in perspective, normally we get that information the middle to end of March. So we were a little behind this year in getting that information due, obviously, to all the things that the ministry was working through. So I have some information now. We actually ended up presenting our budget to board for approval. We had meetings throughout the month of July to keep the board informed of what we were working on, what we were looking at, where we seem to be. We passed a compliant budget in July, I believe it was July 29th, and we submitted it to the ministry by its deadline of August 19th. Now, normally we submit, our deadline to submit our budget is the end of June, but due to the delay in getting the estimates out to us and all the information out to us, our deadline was delayed till the middle of August or so, August 19th. So what are we going to look at tonight? Well, everyone saw me change the screen, right? It now has a presentation overview. So
yeah, I'll get Aaron.
Yeah. Thanks, Brenda. So we're just going to look at our estimated revenues, our estimated expense, and some additional funding that we received. You might have heard as well throughout the summer, there was extra funding received. Majority was actually announced in August or so. We had some federal funding as well as additional provincial funding, again, related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So our estimated revenues for this coming year. So just a reminder, we've looked at this before, but these are the categories and how we receive our revenue from the ministry. So we have the special education per pupil amount, which is tied to enrollment, the differentiated special education needs amount, special equipment amount, the SEAC amount, special incident portion, the SIP, as well as behavioral expertise amount. And just to remind everybody that all revenue received from for special education has to be spent on special education. So we can't use these funds for other purposes. They have to be used for special education. So what changed in the past year between our revised estimates, so what we were estimating we'd receive for 2020 versus what we're estimating to receive for the upcoming school year, or the current school year, I guess now, 2020, 2021. So overall, our special education allocation increased by about 2.2 million or so over our last year's revised estimates. So we received an extra 972,000 and 26,000 respectively, and these are enrollment-driven amounts, as well as this increase is also tied to the collective agreements, the 1% salary changes. So those were reflected in those values as well. The DESNA increased about 712,000. These are more tabled amounts from StatsCan prediction model. So these are almost they are a tabled amount from the ministry, so they aren't necessarily tied directly to enrollment. Our multidisciplinary teams increased a small amount, primarily due to the collective agreement, by about 22,000, similar to the behavioral expertise amount of 13,000. Now this one might be a little confusing in that it looks like our carry forward decreased by 316,000. Now it really didn't decrease. So what happens with our SEAC funding is we actually defer it. So if we don't spend it in the current year, we defer that revenue, which that means is we put it into a separate account. We can't spend it on anything else. And then the upcoming school year, we spend it on SEAC equipment and such. So what we say we're decreased is that we're spending our money as we've spent more money in the previous years. We have less to carry forward. So our carry forward is essentially decreased by $316,000, but our CF funding is still the same. It gets a little confusing when you start dealing with deferred revenue and such, but bottom line, we still are spending our money and we've received the similar amounts. Investment in system priorities funding. So this is something new. This was a result of the 2019-20 collective agreements, the settlement, and it added about $793,000. And what that's primarily for EAs and as well as for some ASPE positions that we've added as well from that funding. There also will be another portion from the EWECTA settlement funding, but we'll have to get the more particulars for that at our next presentation. Our Pupil Foundation grant, our additional COVID-19 funding announcement. So we did receive about an extra $150,000 as part of our GSNs, as well as announced priorities and partnership funding. Now, although it says it decreased by $63,000, that's because when I'm comparing it to the revised estimates, which we report in December, we would have received additional priorities and partnership fundings that just haven't been received to date when we did the budget back in June. So the majority of that decrease will probably be brought up once we receive additional priority and partnership funding. PPFs, or what everyone might remember them as, are EPOs. That's another name that they were formerly called. So just a reminder, we had this this graph back in June, but I thought I'd bring it forward again. That as you can see, we are tracking a board that is tracking with enrollment growth. Having said that, we are looking at this year's enrollment, and similar to the rest of the province, we're looking to see if there is a decrease relative to what we were expecting to have for this time. A lot of other boards you might be hearing that their enrollment figures are down from what they estimated, and we're looking at that as well. So what will that impact? Well, with a large part of our funding, if I go back up, the SEPA and the SEA, they were increased. A large part of that is based on enrollment, so that could have an impact if enrollment doesn't come to fruition to what we estimated back in June. So let's look at our revenue. So this is similar to other years. You can see that there's our SEPA amount, about almost 29 million. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. We have the SEA equipment amount, about 1.8 million, 1.7.5 million. And then we get into more of the tabled amounts. So these are amounts that aren't necessarily tied to enrollment. So the measures of variability amount, the projective special education statistical prediction model amount, and then the DESNA base amount, as well as the MDT or multidisciplinary team amounts for both staff and for other staffing resources. So that totals about 18 million or so. We have the special incident portion of the SIP, also known as a SIP, about 1.3 million. The behavioral expertise amount, this changed slightly, a slight growth, and more to cover just the salary changes, as well as a slight change to the amount per pupil. Now we look at other revenues. So hopefully you can see my pointer. I'm kind of highlighting the 275, 368, almost right in the middle of the page there. So that's our Pupil Foundation grant. So what I mean by that is we have money within that grant for EAs, so I included that in as well. We have announced PPF, so forming the EPOs of about 150,000. Like I mentioned before, this was as of July when we brought this in June, July when we brought this forward to board, and we will be hopefully receiving more of these PPFs as time goes by. The investment in system priorities, that's the amount that I mentioned before, which was tied to the QP settlements and the ASPE settlements. And we also have the COVID Spec Ed funding. So this was part of the funding that the ministry announced back in June, along with the GSNs of about $150,000 or so. I believe it was about 10 to 15 million provincially, and our allocation was about 150,000. So that totals about 1.4 million. And then here you can see this is where we look at our special education equipment amount. So we start with our opening balance, we add in our current year allocation, less the amount that we plan on spending in the coming years. We plan on spending both our opening balance and our current year allocation. So that leaves us with an ending balance of zero. So our net change is 224,000. So after you add all those up, we're almost at $51.9 million or so. That's our revenue. And again, this is the GSN side of the revenue and any PPFs or such that I mentioned before. Now, one thing I should mention here, I should go back to here, is we used to always include as part of the revenue the special classes amount or self-contained classes. I think it's actually now the special classes amount, and that was typically between 1.7 and 2 million or so. But really, we excluded it this year, and the reason we excluded it was that funding is specifically tied to our enveloping principle, in that we have to. The ministry requires that all spec ed money has to be spent on spec ed initiatives. So as part of that, what the ministry would do is basically allocate a certain portion of our funding towards meeting that objective of using our spec ed funding for spec ed purposes. But it really wasn't additional funding. So to put it, I guess in another way to put it, is that if we didn't have any special classes or specialized classes, we wouldn't have any additional revenue, nor we have any reduction in revenue. Our revenue would be constant. So we've excluded it from this calculation because, like I mentioned, there would be no increase or decrease if we didn't have any self-contained classrooms. And I didn't want to confuse the situation, so I excluded that amount. Now we're going to look over at our expenses for the upcoming year. So we have our certs and our sets of about 119.5 million or so. That's our salaries and benefits, and that includes our secondary department heads as well. We also have our educational assistant salaries and benefits of about 26.2 million or so. We have our professionals and paraprofessional salaries and benefits, as well as some central admin staff, secretarial workers, social workers, CDA, CYCs, SLPs, and our BAs, and that's about 8.6 million or so. Sorry, I apologize. I was using acronyms. Social workers, communicative disorder assistants, child and youth counselors, speech and language pathologists, and behavioral analysts. I apologize. I shouldn't use acronyms. Consultants and salary benefits. So we have our educational assistant supervisors. We have 241,000, and our spec ed consultants of about 857. Which were roughly the same as last year, and it's the increase is due to the change in the collective agreements. So that's about 1.1 million. The superintendent of special education, administrative assistants, they do not show up on this, and the reason for that is we've actually classified these, sorry, they're paid out of the board governance grant. So it's a different grant that it comes out of. So we do not include those salaries and benefits for those two positions in our spec ed enveloping. So our total salaries and benefits expense, and that's the majority of our expense, is about 55.4 million. Our other expenditures, everything else that's related to special education, is about 2.2 million. So then our overall special education expense is about $57.6 million. And I should mention too that transportation, there's expenditures for special education transportation, but those are actually covered in our transportation allocation. So they are not included in this allocation here, but there's definitely is a cost associated with that, about 1.7 or so million. So looking at our special education expenses, so as I mentioned, the largest being salaries and benefits, 55.4 million, or roughly 96%, which is similar to other years. The remaining 2.2 is your travel, textbooks, classroom materials, supplies, equipment, workshop, things like that. Overall, those special education expenditures are about 4.5 million higher than last year than the 2019-20 revised estimates. And then, as I mentioned earlier, our transportation cost is about 1.75 million, which is not captured in this analysis here. It's included in our transportation allocation. So we have our shortfall of about 5.7 million. Now there are other areas of GSN to complement these expenses and help close the gap. It's just difficult to pull it out directly. But as I mentioned earlier, the specialized classroom revenue was included in the past revenue calculation. However, this did not generate any additional revenue, as it only assisted in the enveloping of expenditures. So if you take that out, similar to other years, you drop that down, it's about 3.7 or so million, which is in line to what it was last year. It's around similar to when you factor that in. So, as I mentioned earlier, we received additional funding in August for COVID-related expenditures. So I put it all on one slide. I was going to separate it out on the two, but I think it might be easier just to view it like this. So what did we receive in addition to our GSNs as a result of COVID? Well, we received a PPF, also known as an EPO from other years, for supporting student mental health of $150,000. We received about $164,000 for return to school for special education. And then you might remember back at the end of August or so, August 26th, we received additional funding from the federal government for education, and how this was allocated to the schools, where we were allocated about $196,000, and that could be spent covering the previous two initiatives, or either for supporting student mental health or for special education return to school. Either one of those, it was applicable to use that, or was permitted to use that funding for. So how did we use that funding? Well, we're looking at a social worker, 1 FTE, some additional sets and certs of about 3.5, an itinerant EA, as well as an itinerant CYC. So when you add those up, those roughly come to about the 6.5 positions, and roughly the amount of our funding. So that concludes the update on the budget, something that normally we would have done back in earlier part of the year. Hopefully we're looking at April or so now, but due to extenuating circumstances, unfortunately it's being presented to you in October. That concludes the presentation.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Do we have any questions? If people just want to type it in the chat box. Okay, Maria, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, because it said my microphone was muted, so I'm confused. Thank you very much for that, and I especially appreciate the extra COVID schedule there, because that was one of my questions. I had a couple of questions, and if there's, I don't know if there's anyone behind me, I can go back in the queue. Brenda, you just let me know. You mentioned, Aaron, that our expenses are $4.5 million higher than last year, I believe, and I'm just wondering what's behind that increase.
Good question. We have additional EAs is one. A couple of things. We actually have, so we have additional EAs. We received that extra funding. The extra 793 funding for EAs, as well as I believe we have an SLP, a 0.5 SLP, and a 0.5, I believe, social worker with that additional, as well as the 1%. So we received the 1% funding, Maria, for all the contracts. So there's a 1% just on salary alone, as well as some additional funding or costs related to the benefits, as well as additional positions required due to growth. So we have some additional positions that we had to add additional certs and sets and such, because due to growth, we've added additional positions for that. Those are the main changes, in addition, obviously, to the salary. And that salary is pretty much across the board. That 1% isn't necessarily just for teachers. It's for teachers, EAs, and basically everyone in the board, with the exception of senior management.
So if I could just clarify, because I think I'm maybe getting a little confused between revenues and expenses. So you said 1% increase. So that's to salaries, and that's through the negotiation process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
through the collective agreements.
So then we would have received revenue to offset that as well. Is that correct or no?
We would receive revenue to offset a portion of that, but because, as you can see, we have a gap between where we are funded for and what our expenses are. Some of that gap is obviously not funded, so we would definitely receive some of it, but not all of it. So we're looking at an increase in expense, right? So we're comparing last year to this year. So that expense increase would have been last year to this year. So last year, just because of the timing of everything, the collective agreement, it wasn't settled for the teachers until I believe it was in March. And when we did the revised estimates, that was done in December, with information going back to September when you start the process. So it wouldn't be reflected. And that's the comparative, unfortunately, Maria, is that we're comparing it to a static time. So the revised estimates to now, and that's why it wouldn't have been captured last year. But you're right, we would have received funding for that on the revenue side for
Right.
1%.
So do we know how much our spec ed revenues are changed from last year?
The revenue is, I'm gonna go up and the slides are still up, right? Everyone can still.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Scrolling
So
through
our revenue increased by about 2.2 million or so, 2.159 million over last year's revised estimates. So they did go up, and you can see a large part, almost $1 million of that or so is due to enrollment as well as due to the collective agreements.
Okay, and did you say that there was it sounds like there was additional hiring, and that's based on growth in the number of identified students? Is that what I heard?
That would be growth. I wouldn't know if it's based on identified students or not. I don't have that information, but I know we do have additional spec ed employees, whether it be EAs and certs, primarily. That's where the growth is largely reflected. So that would be a part of it, as well as additional funding, like I mentioned on the OECTA side. We had additional money for additional certs and such in the secondary channel.
So I guess that's what I'm wondering. So we have additional employees, but I don't know if that's because we have additional students we're servicing, or because we have now more, maybe a slightly better staff to student ratio.
It's a little of both. We do have additional students as well, so that would be, and I guess I'm looking more on the aggregate picture, like as our enrollment goes up, a percentage would, just using the percentage model, we would have a percentage that would require some intervention of some sort. So.
Sure. Can I go ahead with another question, or is there someone?
Yeah. I don't
have anybody else in the queue right now, Maria. Go ahead.
Nobody else likes numbers as much as I do. I'm an accountant. Aaron can relate.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. And you mentioned 1.75 million in transportation. So is that strictly transportation to our regional classes?
That's any kind of transportation related to special education. So whether it be the specialized busing, the special taxis, anything at all related to special education.
Okay, so it could be students as well that are in a regular class placement, but they need specialized transportation.
Well, they would be still identified students, right? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, so we have students that are transported because they're at regional classes outside their home school. So does that number include those as well?
It would, yes.
Schools? Yes.
And
then we would also, so then we would also have students who could in a regular class placement, but as you say, may require specialized transportation or a taxi or whatever. So those are also included. So include all of it.
We would include those as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Both.
And you do track that separately then in your transportation.
We do. Well, what it is we receive it from HSTS, our consortium, as to how much the busing costs. So when we report to the ministry, we report to the ministry how much our transportation budget is, and we break it down by the parameters. But we definitely do track, and HSTS has tracked how much is for our specialized busing and our taxi program and such for our students. So it is, and there's an account that we allocate it to for spec ed. It's a different busing and transportation account, but it is tracked differently. Yeah.
As well as your regional classes then.
As well as our regional classes, correct. Yes.
Okay. I wanted to kind of understand that piece about the allocation that changed from last year about the regional classes, but can I maybe do that offline, because I think it might get a little bit tedious and I don't want to take up too much time. But if I could, unless someone else would like to understand that better, because I remember I was confused by it last year. Now I think I'm more confused. So if we could do that, that would be great. And I guess my last question, so normally SEAC is part of this, more part of the process earlier on, and we set some priorities for budget and all of that, but the numbers came out late, and COVID kind of disrupted everything. But we did, like, some of that additional money that came in that you had in that last slide, that came in, I believe, after the budget was approved by the board.
That's correct. Yeah, it would have been in August that we received this funding.
Yeah.
So
right, and I've seen those memos. So I'm just wondering how those decisions were made as to how those funds were going to be spent. I don't know if that's a question for you or for Superintendent Ballo, but I'm just wondering about kind of that process.
I think Superintendent Ballo might have a better idea, but it would be based on a need too, because remember we're also setting up a virtual school in the elementary panel, so that is another additional need with a requirement there as well, to kind of at least start the process going.
Okay.
Stephanie, do you want to respond?
Sure, I can do that.
Sure.
Yeah, so we have identified some needs as a team, and in listening to some of the commentary, even from the last meeting that we had, our last SEAC meeting. So with respect to the spec ed funding in particular, as we had already shared, we had to hire 3 sets, and that, as Erin has mentioned, really came out of the need that presented itself in the supports that are required to support those students who are learning virtually. And we had made the commitment to honor our placement options. So of the spec ed funding, we had to hire, and we were happy to hire, 3 sets to be able to provide the 2 gifted classes and the STC class. So that was part 1, and as I said, we have brought that a couple times at last meeting as well, just to say that that's a general need that we would have to invest in. And then since that time, we've had a conversation, and I think just hearing some of the feedback as well around some of the struggles or challenges, let's say, with the virtual school and the home school, and wanting to be able to offer supports to our virtual learners. We felt it was important to look toward employing a virtual school iCert. So until this time, we've had to reallocate some of our current staff just to sort of help troubleshoot. So moving forward, we will be able to have a 0.5 iCert who can liaise with the administrators of the virtual school with matters pertaining to special education, and they can continue to support the 3 specialized class teachers, which is what those teachers need in terms of being able to program for specialized classes. And the person would also be involved in facilitating communication between virtual teachers and certs as appropriate, and helping with any of the tech needs and tech PD. We're also looking at having them facilitate drop-in sessions for our virtual teachers related to supporting students with special education needs. I'm happy to pause at that point. So I would say, based on the natural needs that have come out of getting the remote learners up and running and the transition and supports between the 2 platforms, that's what's presented itself.
Thank you very much for that. And I just have one quick follow-up to that, if I may.
Sure. Yes.
So totally appreciate all that. Makes sense, and appreciate having that the placement options are being honored and that we have the separate virtual classes. I'm just trying to understand. So we have 3 virtual classes, so we need 3 teachers for those.
Mm-hmm.
Did we not also then need less teachers in the physical classes, or did that need not change? I don't know how the numbers kind of play out.
I can speak to that, Maria. Sure. So what happened is, let's take a typical gifted class. We had a number of students who opted for virtual learning, and we might have had a couple students from each of the programs. So not enough to collapse a class. We actually have been able to maintain the classes at the sites as are, because we've had a strong enough number in each of those classes. But when you take a combination of 2 or 3 from each of the sites, then we were able to create the virtual classes. So we're not in a position to collapse any of the existing classes. And so therefore, as a result, we didn't have extra staffing, and we had to hire 2 people to be able to offer a grade 5-6 class as one, and then a grade 7-8 class. And the students in each of those classes are a combination of students across the system that land in those grades.
That makes total sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I would say that we're very happy to have that 0.5 iCert as well to support all students. including those in specialized classes, but also staff who have students with special needs in their classrooms. And if you'd like, Brenda, I can speak to the itinerant CYC position, because I think it's kind of an interesting idea that the team has come up with.
Sure.
Again, based on some of the conversation that we even had at our last SEAC meeting, where we talked about, varying needs that students with varying profiles may have. So the idea of the CYC in particular is to have them support students in specialized classes as well as students with special needs in a mainstream class. The position would support both elementary and secondary students. In collaboration with the spec ed teacher and school-based CYC, they'll be able to identify classroom needs and appropriate programming and or activities to support the learning and growth of students in specialized classrooms. As well as our other students. So the delivery model is still to be determined, but we're looking at focusing on those specialized classrooms and some of the programming that can be offered, that we offer in many of our classes, such as Model Me Kids, Minds Up, social skills. We're looking at having the ICYC create a schedule of support to ensure they can provide programming across the system, and that's why it's a system CYC position. And we're really hoping to build capacity this year so that they'll be able to generate some great resources that we can use in the years to come when we don't have the funding that we have this year. One of the examples, was a gifted class, maybe some anxieties. It could be any type of student with special education needs.
Great, thanks, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
Was there any other questions for Aaron? Will we have him available on his budget presentation?
Brenda, can I just make one clarification? And
Sure.
Oliver helped me out here. I mentioned before there was a 0.5 SLP, and I initially said the 0.5 was a social worker. It actually was in the psychology staff. So that extra 0.5 was in the psychology staff. It wasn't a social worker. So thank you, Oliver.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Okay, if we're good for questions, and remember, if something comes to you, for people who numbers is not their thing, if you have a chance to take a look at this and it comes to you, after, please feel free, to reach out and ask Aaron for any clarification or any question that you may have. That's not a problem. So if we're good here, I'm just watching the chat.
Brenda, is it also okay for people who like numbers who think of more questions?
Yes, of course, it's fine.
Because, it never ends with us number people.
I'm just speaking about the, specifically about the people who take, they need some time to process this. So, I know for some people it's hard to, comprehend and be able to ask those questions right off the bat. And so if there is any follow-up questions, just send them off to Aaron and perhaps, copy everybody so they can see in case they're interested. And that would be great. Aaron, I'm sure that would be okay.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Brenda.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
No, we really appreciate you taking the time, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, take care. So we're going to move to our second presentation. I'll just give us a chance to get that on the screen there. And so coming up, we have a presentation from Aaron Oak from the School-Based Rehabilitation Services Update, which I'm really excited about. So I saw Christy Morgan has joined the meeting. So Christy Morgan is the Director of Clinical Services at Aaron Oak Kids. And then I think we have Susan Bowman on the line. And is Barbara on the line as well?
Nope, it's just Susan and I today, Brenda.
Okay, perfect. No problem. So go ahead and start, and then we'll hold our questions till the end.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today. As Brenda mentioned, I'm Christy Morgan with Aaron Oak Kids, and as many of you do, I'm sure you have children at home, and I have teenagers who I've off the gaming, so I'm hoping my connectivity stays throughout the presentation, but I apologize if I have to turn off my camera. So I'm going to talk a little bit today, if you go to the next slide, around our agenda, just to give you an update around our school-based rehab services, which we refer to as SBRS. We're going to give you a high overview of our service delivery model and talk to you a little bit about our school visit criteria, our referral criteria, some of the virtual supports that we put in place during the pandemic, especially for those students who are virtual or online students, as well as addressing the equipment needs that there may be at home to support educational programming. And then we're going to share with you our contact information and some of our communication components that we put in place as we have launched our school-based rehab service. So to start, I'll just share some high-level overviews and guiding principles. So Erin Oak Kids will provide occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and some speech therapy services to the students in publicly funded schools in Halton in order to facilitate that participation in school curriculum. For the speech therapy, we are going to go into more details and talk about how we collaboratively work with our district school board partners as well. Prior to any of our students starting with our school-based services, the family will be contacted by that clinician for consent before we initiate any services. And then our SBRS therapist will assess the students to determine that level of needs and then what is the most appropriate service stream. We are looking at very much working with our school teams and collaboratively determining our service plans for all of the students. Next slide. In terms of our family engagement, one of the components that we're really hoping to look at within this SBRS model is that active family participation. We have a new family portal at Erin Oak Kids called Erin Oak Kids Connect, and families who choose to sign up for that portal, they can receive all of their treatment notes. The clinicians can also share therapy resources. There's information in that portal specific to their student. If they have any other appointments, for example, a specialty clinic that may be on site at Erin Oak Kids, their appointment dates would be in there, as well as any workshop information that is available, maybe through that portal. We are also looking at a messaging system. So if families want to contact their clinician because perhaps they've not been able to see them when they are in seeing the student, then they would be able to message them through our Erin Oak Kids Connect portal. We also have a wide range of workshops available on our Erin Oak Kids website that families may be interested in that could continue to support goals that they are working on in the home environment. Next slide, please. So with regards to our referral form, we do have one referral-based rehab service. Typically, those referrals are generated by the school support team. They also may be generated by the school
Seems like Christy might be frozen. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. I've just sent her a text to let her know that she's, oh, maybe she's coming back on.
Okay. Oh, we can't hear her.
Okay. I mean, okay, just give me 1 minute.
Of course.
Okay, so we'll wait for her to come back online, but I can speak to the referral forms. We have, we're really excited that we have one standard referral form across all of our catchment area, and that these referral forms are generated by the school team. And for speech therapy referrals by the board SLP, supported by a speech therapy questionnaire. And right now we're accepting referrals through fax or mail, and we're very excited that we're moving to an encrypted email solution where the referrals will be able to be emailed directly into our intake team. Next slide, please. So next I'm going to be speaking about the occupational therapy model for school-based rehab services. This is the service where we have the most change. We're very excited about this new model. In the tiered model of service, it's represented by a pyramid, with the largest part at the bottom of that pyramid representing the classrooms that the school occupational therapist can serve at a broad, universally applied concepts level using the good for all concept. The middle part of the pyramid, it represents students who may need just a little more support. They might need some individual or some group intervention to work on skills. And that very top, smallest part of the pyramid represents specialized intervention for a relatively small number of individuals, typically around equipment needs. And here's a nice representation of the pyramid. Literature tells us that that bottom part of the pyramid, where we will be providing universal design to the classrooms, to the classroom teachers, that service about 80% of our students very, very well. What the literature shows us is that 10 to 15% of our students really do need some additional intervention, and in the form of small group or individual. And at the very top of the pyramid there, you can see that about 5% of our students require individual intervention for very specialized needs. So I'm going to be speaking more about that bottom part of the pyramid because that's really new for SBRS this year. So the universal service is that which benefits all children within the classroom and consists of consultation usually around changes to the classroom environment or instructional methods or materials. What that might look like, for example, is a visual schedule for children in a kindergarten classroom telling them what's going to be happening in the morning, or markers on the floor to help them with personal spacing when they're lining up to go outdoors. The OT consults to the teacher within the context of the classroom, providing evidence-informed strategies and suggestions. And the goal of this is to increase the capacity of the educator through knowledge transfer from the OT. For universal service, the therapy team will include occupational therapists, but also occupational therapy assistants who may be able to support within the classroom. The frequency of service depends upon the size of the school and the number of identified students requiring occupational therapy. And the occupational therapist will come to the school on a regularly scheduled basis, in the schedule created in conjunction with the school staff. Sometimes after universal design services have been applied, a child will be identified who's still not able to participate fully within the learning environment, and they may require more intensive services through Tier 2 targeted service, which we'll talk about next. So Tier 2 provides more specific strategies, skills, or accommodations to enable the full participation of the student within the classroom. As I've mentioned, that intervention can be in small group format or individualized consultation or intervention. What this typically will look like is support around fine motor skills such as printing. It can be working on activities of daily living directly related to participating in the curriculum. Next slide, please. So Tier 3 service is that very top of the pyramid, required for about 5% of our students to participate within their environment using specialized strategies, equipment, and one-to-one skill development. This tier is most similar to the traditional model of therapy, with outcome-focused intervention provided when needs arise, rather than on a continuous basis. And this tier of service, this top tier, also has wraparound service for center at Erin Oak Kids and in-home needs, typically for physically complex students. Next slide. Thank you. So this slide is showing what our criteria is for occupational therapy, and this is true for all of our services, that we have criteria for urgent, priority, and standard assessments. So urgent assessments, when we receive, the therapist is typically scheduled into the school within about 7 days of receiving that referral. For our urgent clients, these are those students who require environmental modifications or equipment for safety or access in the bathroom or classroom. They have significant physical needs or have had a change in medical status, typically post-surgical or prolonged hospitalization. And they require the assistance to ensure a safe return to school related to equipment, lifts, and transfers. Very often you'll see that the therapists are joining these students on their first day of return to school. The next category are referrals that are considered to be a priority, and these are for students who need new equipment to support their physical needs. They're able to access school, they can go to school, but they have mobility or equipment or accessibility needs within the school environment. And for these clients, as a guideline, we try to get in within 4 weeks of that referral. And for our standard referral, these are students who are typically experiencing difficulties with written output, organizational skills, and they require consultation just to maximize their participation and help them to access the curriculum. Within occupational therapy in the elementary school, because of that tiered model of service and the regularly scheduled visits for the occupational therapist, there is no waiting list. So for occupational therapy, those students go right onto the elementary school caseload. We do have a small waiting list for our secondary school students for occupational therapy. Next slide, please. This is just showing some of the highlights from our referral form for occupational therapy services. It's fairly streamlined in that the person who's making the referral just does check boxes for what the referral is being made for, typically physical equipment needs. The occupational therapist with the school has identified a need for assessment or sensory-based needs for some of our students. And you can see that we've got ways to identify that the school feels that this is an urgent referral or a priority service referral. Next slide, please. The next service that I'll be speaking to is physiotherapy service. The physiotherapists provide consultation to the school for equipment needs, safety, and participation in the school environment and curriculum, consulting to the classroom, the hallway, stairs, physical education, and outdoors. And similar to that top tier within occupational therapy, physiotherapy provides a wraparound of service for out-of-school needs, for in-home and in community for our physically complex students. Next slide. Similar to OT, we have the 3 different categories for referral for similar reasons. Urgent referral, where the therapist is typically seeing the student within 7 days. There are mobility or ambulation status or physical management, which indicates an immediate safety risk. There are significant physical needs or a change in medical status, such as surgery or prolonged hospitalization, and they require assistance to ensure a safe return to school related to equipment, lifts, and transfers. Physiotherapy priority referral. These students are able to access the school, but they have mobility, equipment, or accessibility needs within the school environment. Some of our students have significant cardiorespiratory function concerns, requiring instruction to school personnel or LIN personnel for management. And for standard referral in physiotherapy, these students typically require consultation to maximize their participation in activities for gross motor skills, balance, or coordination. Students who are qualifying for a standard referral typically are independently ambulating. And currently there is no wait for physiotherapy services through SBRS. Next slide, please. So this is just a little snapshot from our referral form for the physiotherapy services. Again, the school staff checks off what they're referring their student for, safety, and they can identify on the referral form if it's an urgent referral or if it's a priority referral. Next slide, please. So just going to speak to our final service, speech therapy. The team includes a speech language pathologist, SLP, and a speech language therapy assistant to support students with moderate to severe fluency, articulation, phonology, and voice disorders. The service options may include individual intervention, home programming, or group intervention. There's no change to the school-based rehab services criteria in that language services continue to be provided by the school board therapist. Now, the next slide here that we have shows the urgent, priority, and standard referrals for speech therapy. We don't receive that many urgent referrals for speech therapy. Typically, the referrals that we receive that we consider to be urgent are those for post-operative referrals following cleft lip palate repairs or vocal cord repair. As I said, these are rare. We do have a category for priority referrals, which is used more frequently for students who have severe dysfluency, oral motor difficulties, or childhood apraxia of speech with secondary behaviors impacting social and emotional well-being. Also students who have had a recent acquired brain injury. Standard referral are children that typically go onto the waiting list who have a voice disorder, dysfluency, moderate to severe articulation, phonology, and motor speech, and resonance concerns. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of the speech referral that the school board staff complete. And it's a checkbox where we indicate if it's an urgent or a priority referral. And this is combined with a speech questionnaire that's completed by the school board speech therapist. Next slide. So what we're going to be speaking about next is the virtual care plan. We've all had incredible opportunities in the last few months to pivot and learn new things, and our clinicians have become very adept at telepractice using Zoom healthcare, and this is available for all distance learners. We're also using Zoom healthcare for team meetings with the school, and we can use Zoom healthcare for consultation within the school upon request. Speech virtual workshops for families are coming soon, and SLPs may use digital tests and virtual care best practices to support assessment and intervention. Next slide, please. OTs and physios may work with families and vendors to support strategies for at home. And OT may do some fine motor assessments for distance learners, virtual training on simple equipment, and some assessment and treatment can occur, but some assessment and treatment for OT and PT is difficult, things like range of motion and weight bearing, but we do our best through our virtual Zoom calls. Next slide, please. We have several incredible resources on the Erin Oak Kids website that all people can access, actually, for the parent and teacher. Gross motor skill development workshop and core strengthening workshop. These are, it should say under development on here. They're coming soon, should be online in November. We're very excited about these. Currently up online though is understanding behavior and fine motor. And parents can initiate attending our workshops that include One Bite at a Time, which is a feeding workshop, teaching daily living basic skills, developing communication, introduction to ABA, sleep solutions, and toilet learning. In order for a parent to sign up for these workshops, they call intake and say that they're interested in attending, and they get registered into the program. They don't necessarily need to have a client. Their student doesn't need to be a client of Aranoak Kids. Any parent in Halton and Peel can access these programs. Next slide. Communication. We're excited that Aranoak Kids is using encrypted email for all emails sent to school board recipients. We can use this to communicate and share information with our school board partners without the risk of a breach of information. School board recipients need to do a one-time register with the encryption service, and then every time they receive an encrypted message after that, they just need to enter their password to open it. So contact information, my name's Susan Bowman. I'm a clinical services supervisor, and you can see there my extension and my cell phone number. And I am covering schools in the Halton Catholic District School Board in Oakville, Milton, Acton, and Georgetown. My partner, Barbara Kale, is covering the schools in Burlington. Next slide. Or is that the end? Oh, that's the end. And it looks like Christy did not make it back on.
So Christy's just on my cell phone on speaker.
Oh, great.
To try to listen in a little bit, but Susan, you did a great job.
Oh, thanks.
So thank you, Susan, and thank you, Christy, for your time put in prior to the internet troubles, and we've all been there, so we all feel it. So no worries. I know that I have a list of questions, as I'm sure is probably expected, but before I jump into mine, I wanted to give other members the opportunity to ask some of their questions. And if not, I'm happy to lead the conversation. So is there anyone that wanted to jump in first? No? Okay. I'll start, and then you can certainly jump in. Oh, I see a hand up. Okay, Marika, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. Thank you for the presentation. Just going back to the beginning, we were talking about the portal for the parents, which I think is a great idea, but I always get a little bit concerned. Sometimes that's not accessible for all families. So what are some of the other options if that's not feasible for them to do that for whatever reason? Is there that they can access all that information?
Hi, Marika. Thanks for your question. Parents are always able to call their therapist and talk to their therapist about what's happening with their service and with the visits that have happened at school. Where a parent is unable to sign up for the portal to get their notes, we can mail the notes to the family so that they do have access to that information.
That's great. Thank you.
No problem.
So Susan, it's Brenda. Just to follow up, actually, I had a note, so I'm glad Marika asked that question. Just to follow up, I know that previously the portal was only available to register if you were doing that in person, and obviously with what's going on now, that's not always possible for families who are not going into center. Are families able to join the portal remotely?
Yes, they are. Yeah,
Perfect.
The information to join the portal is on the Aranoak Kids website.
Awesome.
And yes, we do most of our sign up right now is virtual. Okay, perfect. Because I know that was a huge barrier for families who maybe are only in center, once a year for consultative visits, right? They may not be going in all the time, so that's great. I think hopefully we'll have more people that will access the portal. Another comment that came through to me from some parents at the beginning of the year, and this may not be as applicable now because they've probably had a chance to connect with their therapist, was just the issue around needing to actually give verbal consent rather than the ability to give written consent. So I don't know if there's some flexibility there, if there's been some consideration given, but I know of situations where there's been a family that the therapist has actually been at the school and unable to attend to the student because couldn't get a hold of the parent.
And so I just wondered if there's an ability to have written consent forms that could go home to families to fill out electronically and send them back via email in case they can't actually call or do it verbally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting that verbal consent is actually a really important component of our therapists, the way we provide care. We can't actually give a written paper for consent because it needs to be a conversation. You need to have a discussion about what the treatment plan is and what the assessment is going to be, and the parent needs to have the ability to ask questions of the therapist in order for it to be informed consent. And yes, at the beginning of the school year, our therapists did have some difficulties getting in touch with the families, and we've worked really hard to get our therapists. It's a different kind of phone, actually. It's called Jabber, so that they're more easily reached. So we're having much better success getting our in-person consents done.
Okay, because I know that typically in a lot of different ways, the board with students who, where there's a need for that consent piece, it's just usually a whole host of forms. So if they're dealing with any other, let's say private therapists or things like that, you're able to just have a consent of information form. Which I know is a little bit different, but there was some parents who had said, is there a possibility? Because some parents, it was, they were being given direction to just call and leave a voicemail and say, I'm giving I'm giving you consent to go in and meet with my child. So they weren't having that back and forth conversation, which I think is the goal. But it sounds like you've ironed that out, and it sounds like it's a lot easier for parents to get a hold of the therapist now. So that's good news. Okay, I've got another question. I'm watching the chat in case there's somebody else. I've got another question around speech, and Denise is probably going to be ready for it, but I'm just, can you, so for SLP services, can you just explain in a little more detail the role of the board SLP versus the role of SLP being provided through Erin Oak, and what the frequency of intervention might look like for some of those students, and talk a little bit about wait lists. So if there's a student that's currently on a wait list, if there's a student that maybe has had services, they've come off, do they need to go back on that wait list for SLP and possibly wait another 18 months for those services? So if you could talk a little bit about how Erin Oak is handling the SLP piece, that'd be helpful.
Okay, do you have Christy on the phone right beside you? Because she is the goddess of speech questions.
I am here, Denise, and I hope you can all hear me, and my apologies again. I've heard from our therapists they've had some difficulty getting into Microsoft Teams, and I made the mistake of saying the other day, I never have problems. So I think this is why I've had issues tonight, so my sincere apologies. With regards to the SLP services, our SBRS speech language pathologist will support speech, so that is articulation, motor speech, fluency, and voice difficulties. And for each of those service streams, depending on the needs, whether they're moderate or severe, they would be eligible for a number of sessions based on that assessment. With regards to the episode of care, so they may have, for example, a severe motor speech difficulty, they would be eligible for up to 22 sessions of therapy. And once they've finished what we call that episode of care, the SBRS speech pathologist, in consultation with the school team, can re-refer. Previously, with the model in the LINS, there was a year kind of waiting period where the school board SLP would have to track if those students were finished their speech therapy and then needed to go back on to the wait list. We no longer have that with Erin Oak Kids. We're indicating that once they're finished that episode of care, they can go right back onto the wait list and be re-referred if that's appropriate, and there's still some goals for them to work on, and they are making progress. So I hope that answered your questions there as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. That was very helpful. So thank you, because I think there was a little bit of uncertainty around that. And then one of the other questions I had, and it doesn't matter, who wants to sort of take it, but I'm curious, now that we've had Erin Oak coming in for those school-based rehab services, and recognizing that Erin Oak used to have that contract, and then they didn't have it anymore, and then we had our local CCAC at the time take over, and now we're back to Erin Oak. What do you see as being the biggest differences as far as service delivery, perhaps in the model that parents and students and educators may have seen prior to Erin Oak coming in, and what that might look like now that Erin Oak has those school-based rehab services back again?
Well, I can start with that, Brenda. There are several differences. We're so excited at Erin Oak Kids to have school-based rehab services back. As you said, we have had that contract in the past, and we're very happy to have it back. One of the big differences that the schools will see is that they have one therapy team, one physio, one OT, and one speech therapist from Erin Oak Kids, as well as potentially one occupational therapy assistant and one SLTA. Whereas previously with the LIN model, they could have had a number of therapists from the same discipline from different service agencies. So in that way, we've created a lot of efficiency for schools. They know who to contact, and we're really encouraging that the schools connect directly with the therapist involved. The other wonderful difference is that the therapist who's providing services at home is the same therapist who's seeing the student at school. So they really get to know those students well in the home environment, in the school environment, and in the community. They also, the therapist can support some of the medical clinics that the students are going to. They may send information to the clinic practitioners, or they may even attend. So there's some really good efficiencies that are gained from just really knowing your students well. The other significant difference is the change in model for occupational therapy, having the occupational therapist visiting the school on a very regular basis and providing support to all children, really, not just students who are identified to their caseload. So those, I think, would be, for me, the three biggest changes with this new program.
Great. Those are all good changes.
Wondering if Christy had anything she wanted to add?
I think you did a great job, Susan, with that. I think the only piece I would add is just really looking at a continuum of services for any of our preschool clients who may have been working with us since a very young age. We're really committed to that very smooth transition and supporting that whole continuum of services from birth till even up to 19 for some of our most physically complex kids, as well as some of our clients who maybe are accessing only preschool speech and language. We're committed to that transition, and if they require that school-based rehab services, really making sure that we can support as seamless a transition for those clients and families as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for that as well. Again, great. I think we're excited. I know there was some things to iron out, but I think it's great to have the continuity of service back in the schools again, and I'm hopeful that it's going to be a great success. So thank you for presenting to us tonight. I just want to make sure before I let both of you go that there's no other questions from any of our other members. I see a hand up. Marika, yep, go ahead.
It's me again.
No problem.
I just, you mentioned that there was a bit of a wait list for high school for OT. Do you have an idea of how long that wait list is?
Yeah, I do. Right now it's 6 months. We're hoping that, it's not long. We're hoping we've had, as I'm sure you can imagine, a little bit of a slower start to the year with COVID. So we are hoping that those students will be picked up for the next semester.
Of course. And is there a wait list for a speech for the high school students as well, or is that pretty much on par with elementary?
It's the same waiting list. We have one waiting list for all services. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so I don't see any other, if I've missed you, please just shout out. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're good to let our presenters go.
Thanks.
Sorry, if we have any other questions come up, we'll make sure to filter them through to you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much for having us. Take care.
Thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks. That was great. So thank you to whoever arranged for that. I'm glad we were able to have them come in and do that presentation. So I'm just moving along. Item number 3 is the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at the minutes from the last from the last SEAC meeting? And is there any comments, deletions, additions to the minutes? No? Okay, could I get a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Sorry, who was it?
Diane, I move.
Oh, thanks, Diane. So moved by Diane. Can I get a seconder? Oh boy, all at once. So Dan seconded?
Yep.
Thank you, everybody else. Okay, number 4, declarations of conflict of interest. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest this evening? No? Okay, business arising. So the review of the business arising, so the chart was emailed with the package. And I know that, so there's 2 things. So one is I wanted to read off that we did get a response back on the Maxi letter. So I'll send that off, but I wanted to read that response because I know that we did have that as part of our business arising. And then I know, Maria, that you had sent an email through, I saw just before I jumped on. So maybe you can speak to that. But I'd be happy to read the response back to the Maxi letter if anybody's interested in that.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. And like I said, we'll send out a copy, but I wanted to make sure I got it in for tonight's notes. So it says, Dear Ms. Agnew, thank you for your letter of June the 8th, 2020 regarding the Minister's Advisory Council on Special Education, Maxi. I'm pleased to respond on behalf of the Minister. Maxi has an important role in providing advice that informs the government's work in support of students with special education needs. 3 in-person meetings of the council have been held in the last year, June 11th to 12th, November 26th to 27th, and February 11th to 12th. In addition, 4 teleconferences have been held during the school closure period in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, March 21st, April 8th, May 6th, and June 9th to 10th. The next meeting will be held in the fall of 2020. In November 2019, Minister Lecce appointed 4 members, including 2 new members, and the reappointment of 2 others to a second term. In January 2020, he appointed a further member and directed that a call for applications be issued to support filling the remaining vacancies. The deadline for applications was March the 6th, 2020, and those candidates are now under consideration. On May 25th, the minister appointed Peggy Blair as the new chair of Maxi. Members of Maxi are appointed for a fixed term, normally 3 years, and may be reappointed to additional terms up to a maximum of total of 6 years. The council is an advisory agency, and all applications for appointment must be made through the online application portal administered by the Public Appointments Secretariat. The ministry is currently undertaking a review and refresh of its website, including the pages related to the Minister's Advisory Council on Special Education, Maxi. Meeting highlights, the special education update, and other documents will be posted as a part of that process. Thank you for your letter, and I hope you found this information helpful. Sincerely, Claudine Monroe, Director of Special Education, Success for All Branch. So that was the response. Yep, Maria, go ahead.
So it was very informative, but it didn't really address the issues, did it?
No, it didn't, as I expected.
Yes, not too surprising, but you know what? I think that I'm learning this is how these things go. I think the poking may have a benefit, but it was good to hear that the website's being updated, and so maybe there will be more timely information posted there going forward. But who knows how long that's going to take? But
yeah, I mean,
anyway, I guess it kind of is what it is.
Well, we can always be in a position to respond as well. I mean, there's nothing saying that we can't respond back to this letter. So like I said, I'll send that around. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed it tonight as part of that business arising. But certainly if there's something that we feel has not been addressed and we'd like that to be addressed, we can absolutely do that. So that's, the letter is there if we want to keep it on business arising because we're considering a response, we can do that. I'll take the will of the group for that. But yes, I agree. It was a very well written letter and it did answer some things, but not everything. But I think if they're updating and making information more readily available, that's certainly a step in the right direction.
Well, and hopefully it makes them feel the pressure a little bit. I mean, who knows? But I thought they had a meeting, and I don't know when that letter's dated because I thought they had a meeting, I want to say October 7th and 8th, but I don't know, maybe that got canceled or who knows.
Yeah, I'll have to look at it.
Anyway.
I'll pull up the date and let you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you want to speak then? Did everybody receive the email that Maria had sent in just prior to the meeting? If not, it's okay. I had just come in just before, but it was pertaining to the business arising. So Maria, if you want to mention the items and we can talk about that.
Yeah, and I apologize because I had undertaken to do this after our last meeting, and I don't know where the 3 weeks went, so here we are. But basically just some of the items from the June 15th meeting, and I think I spoke about most of these at our last meeting. So it's just a matter of maybe adding them to the schedule. And as I said last time, just a way to keep track, because I find sometimes we talk about we should do this and we should do that, and it's hard to keep track of everything. And as a group we can decide, maybe we decide we don't want to go forward with some of these or whatever. But so what I had in the email was sharing of the ministry memo regarding the spec ed funding model and categories. So when we were talking about the spec ed funding back in June, and if you recall, there was some talk about postal codes and different wacky formulas that are used to determine the funding. So finance did say that they would be happy to share that with us. So, but I don't believe we got it. If we did, then I don't know what happened to mine. But so maybe we can just follow up with them to ask if they can share that with us. The next one was we talked about maybe doing a letter to the ministry about the spec ed funding model, maybe making it more appropriate. So that would be something SEAC could undertake if we decided if there was interest. And then the last two were kind of related. And I was also going to forward some information to Superintendent Ballo, which I haven't done yet, but just to keep it on there, was with respect to the section of the spec ed plan on the board's consultation process. I had asked how we demonstrated compliance with the standard and how to address the requirement going forward. And if you remember in June, we kind of had a bit of a discussion about it, but it's obviously not something that you can resolve quickly in a meeting where it's one item out of many. So those were the items that I would like to see added. They are items that we did talk about as a group. And then I just said even from the October 5th meeting, I had said in the minutes, it says there that I would draft a list, which I've now done, so that doesn't need to go. But and also that Superintendent Ballo would look into that community consultation piece, which is maybe kind of a status update to the other two bullets because it was in relation to those. So that's what I had there.
Okay. Did anybody have any questions about any of those items? I mean, personally, I think they're all applicable. I would have no problem adding those to the business arising. Like we said, there is a reminder. Hopefully, we're able to check them off if there's something that we can actually do to address those. And if not, they stay on there as reminders until such time as we decide maybe as a group that it's not something that we want to keep on there anymore. So I would be fine adding those to the business arising. If any comments, please feel free to we can chat about it now. Yeah, sure. Stephanie, go ahead.
Thanks, Brenda. So I had taken a look at the inquiry that had been made, and I don't know if you would like me to give sort of a brief update at this point, maybe some steps moving forward.
Sure.
Okay, so I can confirm that the plan was submitted to the ministry and they acknowledged receipt without the request for any further information other than what had been provided. And what had been provided is the information that's included in the plan under the heading of community consultation. So that answers that piece. I would suggest, Brenda, that we add it to business arising or leave it as business arising, or at least include it as a next step when we do our update of the plan beginning in the new year, and maybe spend some time further examining the consultation process that's outlined and the materials that need to be included in the plan. And then at that time, if we need to make any amendments, including any additions, then we can do that at that time. It might be a nice area to focus when we look at amending our plan this year. And I'd like to be part of that process.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, Maria, you got your hand up?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for that update, Stephanie. I want to clarify the process, and this was one of the questions I had when Andrea shared the plan with us, because I'm a bit confused because I've heard different things over the years, and I think the ministry's documents might not be up to date. So my understanding was that we don't, or the board does not submit the plan, but it submits like a checklist. It's almost like a self-assessment process where you check off that you comply with the different standards. So is that not what happens? Do we just submit the plan? And then I'm also wondering, so you said the ministry didn't request any additional information. I'm just wondering how quickly that came back, because as the ministry, I can't believe the ministry's looking through every board's plan and, you know, making sure they comply with each of the standards. That would be a really big undertaking. So I'm just trying to
I can answer based on the information that I have, Maria, and obviously I wasn't here when we submitted, but I do know in looking into it that we submitted the plan along with the checklist that's required by the Ministry of Education. And that does get signed off by our Director of Education as well. And we met the requirements at that time, and they did email us back. It was about 2 weeks after we submitted those documents.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and follow up with the additional information that I had undertaken to do at the last meeting, because I don't want to belabor the point here, but when and I was very specific back in June when we discussed this, I don't see how we comply. And one very simple one was, it says in there that you are to report on the results of any reviews that the board undertook with regards to special education, and there's nothing in our plan about that, and I know, and we did do some reviews. So I mean, you're welcome to respond, but I would like to follow up with a bit more detail on that. Maybe we can talk about it further in the next meeting, or however you want to handle it. But
well, with respect to, I know what you're referencing, like the reports and responses to reports and whatnot. I think that those reports are used to build the plan and are included from the perspective of having SEAC's perspective in the development of the plan. And that's why I'm saying it's kind of hard to go backwards at this point. I can certainly look into it further, and you and I can have a further discussion, or we can bring it back to look at what those specific bullets are under the materials that are to be included in the plan. And one of them is a description of any majority or minority reports concerning board's approved plan that's received from members of board SEAC and responses to those reports. I guess I'd leave it to Brenda as to how you want to handle it, if we want to sort of move back, or if we want to look at including these pertinent pieces in our plan moving forward.
So if I can just comment on that. So I hear what you're saying, and this was some of the response that we got last time was, you know, that those reviews sort of have informed the plan, right?
Yep.
Supposedly. So I mean, I'm not going to debate that right now, but what it specifically says, I'm looking at the standard, and again, I was going to share this with you. Maybe you looked at it anyways, but the special education plan must also provide information information on the results of any internal or external reviews, etc. So it's not just that, yeah, you've used those to inform the plan. Like, it's asking for specifics on those. So again, I don't want to. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it as much as you would like, but I don't want to overtake the agenda on this. And we can certainly take it offline and bring something back, or put it as an agenda item for further discussion. Because I also, in terms of, to your point, I had also suggested back in that we have it as a discussion item early in the year, and we're now heading into November, but early in the year as to how we could better comply with this standard going forward, because the standard is about consulting with the community. So that I definitely agree that to take a forward-looking approach to how we could. So I think it would be a good agenda item. I don't know what's on the schedule, but something to have a more fulsome discussion about, I would think would be good.
So I'll jump in here. So I'm happy to add it to an agenda. I would agree that I think it's worthwhile having a conversation. I think with the goal that Stephanie has talked about, which is moving forward. It's hard to go back. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at what the criteria and the standards are, and let's have that conversation. I know that it's October, and we may not be able to get this on, let's say, until a November meeting. But I also think, we did have a lot to cover in September with everything going on as far as back to school and some of the other items that we needed to get through. And then, obviously this meeting, we need to talk about some things. Now, I know that we do have transition on the next meeting, so I just want to take a look at the agenda. But I have no problem if we want to add that on, to have a conversation on the things that we want to keep in mind in advance of doing that review. And I think it'd be great to just try to do that moving forward. If we can, again, take a look at the criteria, take a look at the guidelines, ensure that we're meeting those, maybe review what needs to be done that perhaps hasn't been done in the past, if we think that there's been a gap there, and address those so that, moving forward, when we complete the review of that plan and the submission, that, we feel that we've checked all the boxes. That's my personal thought. I don't know, Stephanie, if that's echoing what your suggestion was.
Yeah, it is, Brenda. I think that there's always great learning to be had. And obviously I'm new in the role as well. So I've been doing quite a bit of reading about the process with the Spec Ed plan. And I think lots of great work has been done. And I also think it's only October. So we've already had 2 conversations in September and October. Even adding it to the agenda as an item to pay attention to, I don't think it's too late. And just looking ahead at what our review process is as a committee, and as a group, when we update that plan, I think it's a really good time to sort of do a very thorough review about with some documents and resources available. At this point, not everybody has the same information in front of them either, right? Sure. So if we do a planning meeting where we spend maybe a little more time on it, then we can have the documents in front of us.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Okay.
Sorry, Brenda, I don't know if you saw that. I had a
Sorry,
follow-up.
go ahead, Maria. Sorry. Yep.
I don't know if there's anyone else. Yeah, no, and I think I just want to. I haven't read through all the standards, but this one is of particular importance to me, I think, because it is about the consultation process, and it's about consulting with the community. So, sure, us as SEAC members, we spent quite a bit of time, and we did a very thorough review of the Spec Ed plan this year. But I'm not, again, it's about giving the community that opportunity, and I think that's a great thing to do, and apparently we're required to. And one comment that I want to make too, like, we're all here representing different associations, but not all of our families are members of our associations, right? So we have Spec Ed students, identified students, who don't necessarily even know that these associations exist. So by finding ways that we can involve the community on a bigger scale, we're reaching out to more of our stakeholders in all of this. So this peace is kind of near and dear to me. I'm a very big believer in consulting with the community as much as possible. So yeah, and my comment about November was just like November's maybe probably already set. So, you know, there's only 10 months, so we're moving along. So it is what it is, but
we can find a way. I think, like Stephanie said, you know, we've talked a little bit in more detail today than we had in the last meeting where it got mentioned. And I don't see any reason why we can't slot that in for a more fulsome discussion, whether that be, you know, next meeting or the following meeting. We can, you know, have that piece added on the business arising so that it doesn't drop off. And, you know, that'll give, I think, everybody a little more time to take a look. As Stephanie said, pull some documents, take a look at some things. And, you know, listen, I don't think anybody is ever adverse to going out for consultation or doing that piece if that's what's required. And it's a piece that we need to do. Then, you know, we'll take a look at that. I don't see any reason why we couldn't. So I think it's a great conversation. We want to make sure that we're doing the most fulsome review as possible, and that we're including as much of the community as possible to get their feedback. So I think, you know, like Stephanie said, she's newer to the role. Let's take a look at, let's try to see if we can get this. I'm just looking at my notes to see if we can fit this in for November. If we can't, we can get it in, I'm sure, in December, and we'll have maybe a bigger conversation with more information to share on that. Does that work?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, perfect. Stephanie, good. I'll move on to our item 6.
Yep, thanks.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so the Special Education Board Policy Review, we don't currently have any policies up for review at SEAC, but the schedule was emailed out to the members from Andrea. So if you did not receive that, please let us know, but you should have received that via email. And that's the calendar, the schedule calendar of the policies that are coming up for review at the policy table. Okay. Item number 7, that is going to be over to you, Stephanie, if you want to review the Spirit of Inclusion Award criteria and information.
Sure, Brenda. So on the screen, you can see the candidate criteria. I guess the purpose of having it on the agenda this evening is to open it up if there are any questions or considerations before we share the document with the system. And I understand that a subcommittee is formed, and I guess we can talk about interest in that or what the process is for that, Brenda.
Yeah, sure. So typically what we've done in the past, and I know that we've taken a look at this because I think CX made some edits over the time to some of the selection criteria, some of the language. But it's there for people to take a look at and review. And yes, so what we've done previously is people that are interested in being a part of the committee would just submit their names to Andrea. And Andrea, how many do we normally pick? Can't remember. It's an odd, I know it has to be an odd number.
I think it's 4 plus myself, so it's 5.
4 members.
Okay. And we never usually have a problem filling that. It's a great process, and it really makes it difficult. Okay, thanks, Rhonda. Yeah, so it makes it really difficult to choose who ultimately will receive those awards, but we all, I think, sit well with the knowledge that each individual nominee is also recognized at their individual schools. So we feel good that they get that recognition, and unfortunately we're only able to select a certain number of students to receive the award. And it's great because we did add in the piece for alternative education, which was fantastic. Camilla went a little bit crazy last year and was just giving out awards to everybody because he just couldn't say no. But I think we're going to go back to the 1 elementary, 1 secondary, and 1 secondary alternative education who will be chosen. So if you're interested, please just forward your name to Andrea. It's a great process. And then the awards are typically, I don't know how we're going to do it. I guess we'll do it virtually. So usually what we do is we bring in the award recipients. We have a little bit of a reception in the boardroom, and they take pictures, and we read out a snippet from the winning submission, and their families are there, and it's so nice. But I don't think we'll be able to do that this year. We'll figure out another way to do it. And then the awards are handed out at the end of year awards of excellence. So it's a really, really nice feeling. And I love the Spirit of Inclusion Award. So I would really encourage anyone that's interested to put their name forward.
Thanks, Brenda. And I would say, even from a school perspective, having been a principal for many years, just being recognized at the school level and having your community around you as a student just means so much still. So sometimes, families aren't even aware of that next step. They just really appreciate that they're being recognized at the school level.
Yeah, it's a really neat, and the stories that come with them are, they're hard. They're hard. They're hard to pick. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on the committee, I think, the last few years, and they're super hard to pick. So if anybody has any questions, or if you take a look at this and you have any questions, please just let us know. We'd be happy to answer them. Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Yep, go ahead, Maria.
I think that was from before, sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I think you didn't see it, so I just jumped in.
Oh, okay.
good.
Andrea, you, Local Richie, you had your hand up? Is Andrea there? Andrea, are you there?
I'm here.
I can't hear
sorry.
you.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. Okay, go.
And in terms of feedback on the criteria, how would you like to receive that?
You can, if it's something quick now that you want to bring up, by all means. And if not, if you want to send an email, please feel free to do that.
I mean, it's more just about, I can just do a quick high level feedback now and then maybe a bit more detail by email.
Sure.
I'm just wondering if, there's possibility in automating the process at all for the submissions. And also when the subcommittee reviews the submissions, now that it'll be virtual, I'm assuming, so you could maybe have that on a SharePoint or some way to maybe see it in advance of the review meeting and have it soft copy versus the hard copies that I've been on the committee the last couple of years, so it would have been a bit easier to have that soft copy, if possible, like on a shared drive or somewhere where you could access it for just a short period of time, just in advance of the meeting. And also just the criteria, if it's possible to narrow that down and almost put it in an order where the one with greatest weighting is kind of first, because I found that we tended to kind of put a lot of weighting on some criteria over others, which would be kind of table stakes criteria. So, because there are quite a few points, and so if there's a way to automate it or make it very structured, where say you down to like 3 top criteria, and people are answering against each of those criteria, it'll just be a quicker process and I think easier to make the decision. So in terms of what criteria, like I said, that would be more deeper kind of thoughts, but those were kind of my initial thinking.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think as well, having been, having been involved the last few years, it can be a long process and it's a lot to read and it's a lot to go through and it's hard to narrow them down. I see Jessica has a comment on like a scoring rubric. Is that what you're sort of thinking, Andrea? I mean, that's
yeah,
tough.
I just feel
that's
like
tough though.
Well, I know what I feel like is if I'm looking at the criteria, not everybody would have it in front of them. But causes others to be valued and included. That seemed to be like really key, where we saw people who were making that effort to actually include others because it's around spirit of inclusion. That was key. But then you're reading through the whole like long submission to kind of find those key points, which really was table stakes at the end of the day. So if you saw more of that, then that seemed to have a great weighting, for example. So but if you see it on the list, which is shown here, it's the second last bullet. But that really was, when you think about the spirit of inclusion, it's being inclusive of others. And so there's the other elements, of course, that we need to consider. But I just think that if we kind of have the right order and, showing probably the one with the greatest weighting first, for example, and then having the description against each of those, versus kind of free format. And I know they're supposed to reference, which criteria is being applied or is being demonstrated. But I just think it might be easier to do the assessment with a little just more tightness around the criteria and structure. I don't know about the rubric piece, but yeah, something along those lines where you a bit more of a scoring, capacity there.
Okay. I mean, I think those, I see your hand up too, Stephanie. I hear exactly what you're saying. I feel like it's a hard thing. These are hard things to put numbers around, and they're hard to put scores beside because they're just so unique, and the applications, as you know, are so unique. The stories are unique, and some of them are 17 pages long that have letters and have pictures attached to them. And then you read one that you're like, oh my gosh, there's this amazing boy that just every day sits at lunch with this other boy who doesn't have anyone. It's such a, they're just so unique. And so perhaps maybe, like we said, it is just the reworking of the way that they're listed. But I think it's a hard one to put some points around. Stephanie, did you want to comment?
Sure. I haven't been part of the scoring process, but in completing the form many times, I do know that there's a point where you're supposed to include the criteria that you're referencing, even if we take a look at the format of that form, and we actually, you can give feedback on the order of the criteria, but even if we look at the form, we actually write, is a builder of school community, so then the school has to write something that speaks to that specific criteria, because otherwise schools tend to write a paragraph, and I hear what you're saying, then you're sort of reading through that paragraph to look, their look fors is essentially what you're looking at, which I think I like the language of a look for more so than a scoring approach. And if that helps the committee, we can certainly, provide a draft and go from that point. And then really everything that we're doing, we're moving to an electronic format. So even thinking about a Microsoft form, something that we can offer schools to complete and see what we can provide to the committee in advance. So you've got time to review it. We can work on that.
I think that'd be great. Andrea, what do you think of that?
The automated form sounds great. I think, I'm not so, I wasn't necessarily thinking of scoring myself. I mean, not that I'm against it. But yeah, if there's just a way to align the comments more clearly to the criteria, and then have the right order, where the most important ones are kind of first. I mean, those were the kind of the key things that I was thinking of. So
yeah, perfect. I think those are great suggestions to just tighten up that process a little bit. Dan, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, just to comment that it's probably the best time to come up with a review of the process. I guess at the least we're gonna get an improvement in, I guess, the electronic format where we don't have to decipher the handwriting, which is gonna be a plus in, I guess, time-wise. And the other thing is to focus on the criteria. I totally agree with Andrea. We were all always looking for how are others being included or personal, I guess, achievements, like overcoming difficulties, stuff like that. So they are there, but you have to look through a lot of, I guess, stories to kind of identify. So if the format is a bit adapted to kind of put things into perspective when they are filled, that it's going to be helpful for everybody.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so Stephanie, I mean, I think we'd like to take you up on your suggestion. If you think that there's a way from a formatting of the form perspective that we could take a look at and give feedback on, that would be awesome.
Okay, and then I would just ask if you have feedback that you'd like to send us in terms of the order of the criteria, we'd be welcome to that, and then we'll work on the document.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up, Andrea. Okay, so 7.2, I'm going to talk just really briefly about this. So at our last board meeting, the board meeting before that, I put a notice of motion forward, and then at our last board meeting, there was a motion on the table to formally recognize the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And I'm really proud that it passed unanimously. So I thank all of my fellow trustees for their support. I don't have the motion here in front of me, but the idea behind it was that there would be a formalized way of recognizing that International Day of People with All Disabilities, and that we put together a board-wide mechanism to recognize that day and put together some resources and as we called it, sort of a resource kit that would be provided to the schools to give them an idea of some of the materials or some of the ideas that they could use in their classrooms to highlight this day or to celebrate people with disabilities. And so I think, and Stephanie, feel free to jump in here, but I think the idea is that we'd like to put together a committee. There's several staff that have indicated they'd like to be a part of this committee, and we'd like to have some SEAC members on there as well to have some input on, what this could look like. I think this is a great initiative for SEAC to be a part of. Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure, Brenda. Yeah, it would be great to have SEAC involved in the committee. And we've also just had some preliminary conversations with the leadership team, and there's a number of people who are very much interested in helping get this very special time off the ground, especially in our board. We haven't recognized it in the past. Our preliminary discussions at this point, we've talked about developing a resource kit that would include information and activities designed to build empathy and understanding embedded within a call to actions. We think it's really important to have that educational piece as well as a call to action to support those with different abilities and challenges. We've talked about the messaging and how we think it's really important that we're explicitly aligned with our Catholic values and focus on faith in each of our grade levels. And we do recognize the theme is not all disabilities are visible. So the kit would also focus on spreading awareness and understanding of disabilities that are not immediately apparent. And we also talked about the importance of student voice and being able to capture whether it's a focus group or some input from students, perhaps our student trustees, and involving the voice of even some students with disabilities to be included as part of that discussion in that focus group. So these are just preliminary ideas, but we certainly do look forward to coming together as a steering committee and having multiple voices, including frontline staff. So, whether it's educational assistants, administrators, certs, we don't want to make it too big, but we do want to have a balanced representation because everybody's part of it. And
that's awesome, Stephanie. When are we looking to have that start? Like, when would you like to have, if there's people from SEAC that are interested in being on a part of that steering committee, when would you be looking at having that start?
Soon. So we looked at the calendar today, and the actual day is December 3rd. And I know that the motion talked about a week-long recognition. So if we want to start the week, it's Monday, November 30th. Okay. And then that would capture that we do something special on the 3rd to recognize the day. Okay. I can certainly send meeting dates. I think that we're looking even as early as this Thursday. And I can send the information. If somebody's interested, they could reach out to you and let us know. And we are cognizant of people's time and people work, and if we want students involved. But we are going to try to aim for this Thursday morning. And then we can plan dates after the first meeting and see what works for the group. But just given the timelines, we thought if we can at least get a template or something together, even if a SEAC member is not able to attend the meeting, then we can have something to share with the greater group.
For sure. Okay, that's perfect. Thanks so much, Stephanie. If there's anybody that's interested in being a part of that, it sounds like this Thursday will be possibly the first meeting. Stephanie will send that out if there's anyone that's interested, and then we'll go from there. So I really appreciate that. I'm excited to see where this goes.
We are too.
It'll be awesome. Yeah, no problem. Is there any questions on that before I go to number 8 on our agenda? Okay, well then it's back over to you, Stephanie. So you've got the superintendent's report.
Okay, great. So I thought I might start with just a few follow-up items from the last SEAC meeting that we had. Obviously, budget was one, and we've already discussed that. There was also an interest in the number of virtual students and some participation data with respect to students with special needs. So we did pull information about October 20th, and numbers change on a rotating basis. But as of that date at elementary, we had 515 students with IEPs who are participating in virtual learning, which represents approximately 10.8% of virtual learners. And at secondary, there are 573 students that have an IEP who are participating in virtual learning fully, which we would consider our cohort C students, which is approximately 14.7% of virtual learners. The other item from Business Arising we already talked about. And then just to provide an update about gifted screening, and I do have Jody and Oliver also here, so if we have any questions. The question came up last time about what are we doing about administering the CCAT, and we have come up with a plan, and the plan is that the gifted screening will be, or we're not calling it just the gifted screening, but the CCAT will be provided during the same time period as students who are in person. And the virtual students will participate at the school. It's 3 hours, so it's a half day through the school-based cert. We had approximately 460 grade 4 students, and really we felt that that was the best option. We initially talked about having some sites, but there's really no way that we would be able to accommodate all of those students. So we are working with school certs and administrators to make that possible at the school level. And then the other update, we had heard from SEAC that there is a request to have any feedback that we may collect shared with SEAC. And we do have 3 different pieces of information. For the sake of time tonight, we thought we would just focus on one. And that was some of the feedback from the Summer Learning Program and Summer Learning Transition Program. So I'm going to ask Jody to just give a brief overview of some of the feedback that we received, and we just put it in a template. And it also speaks to the feedback and future planning, which is an important part of reviewing the stakeholder feedback that came to us from the programs.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. So yes, we, as you know, we had the summer learning program this summer. We had 2 weeks in July and 2 weeks in August. And as part of the feedback, we wanted to hear from parents as well as teachers to help inform what we were going to do in September, as well as if we had further funding or wanted to continue programming next summer, you know, what went well and what we could do better. So we did an online survey, again, from parents and teachers. There was a participation rate, so there was 125 registrations between the 2 summer programs, and we were able to actually accommodate all those students that wanted to participate in the program in the summer. Between the 2 programs, we had 61 responses, and some parents may have completed the questionnaire twice because there were differences to the programs, and we did ask if they could to answer the questionnaires both times if they wanted to provide feedback if their child participated in July and in August. The survey was distributed to 22 certs and sets. We had, as you know, certs supporting our high school programs that were running credit earning programs. We had certs supporting the grade 6, 7, and 8 program, as well as Camp Summerland. So we had them as well as their specialized programs, and we had 15 responses to that feedback. Of those 22. So one of our greatest successes actually is that all 61 respondents said if the program was offered next year is that they would register their child again. So that was encouraging to hear, not that there wasn't some feedback on some of the challenges, but it was nice to know that those were things that could be overcome and they would be interested in participating again next year. So some of the anecdotal feedback was around using the use of Teams, which I know that our schools are using now, and the feedback was that it was relatively easy to use. I think it took a little bit of time to get used to it, but a great way to be able to move from large to small groups. They one of the biggest pieces was the engagement. So they really felt that the child was engaged in the program, and they really liked the social aspect of it. And the other piece that they said was that they liked having the support of the different disciplines. So we worked with SLPs and BAs to support the program as well, and they really enjoyed that aspect of the program. Some of the challenges that came as a result was matching the levels of students in the class. So I think some parents felt that the classes may be a little bit too high or a little bit too low for their child. And I believe that part of that was the quick turnaround time and getting the programs up and running. So I do feel like we could problem solve around that and getting more feedback from the certs and the consultants and iCerts about where they're, that student is at, and being able to match those children up a little bit better. And then the other piece is the expectations about the program. So some parents thought it would be more of an academic focus. And while we did focus on functional literacy and numeracy, we focused equally on social skills and adaptive functioning skills. So there was 4 components to the program, and it was outlined. But of course, when you hear, I guess, the traditional idea of summer school and summer learning, that they thought maybe there would be a greater focus on the literacy and numeracy. For the teacher survey, they felt that the specialized programs and the class sizes were manageable with the EA support. And we based the sizes of those classes on what we would have traditionally in school. And then for the secondary caseload, they did feel it was a little high. There was about 100 students per cert. We weren't sure how many actually spec ed students we had that would be credit earning. And that is part of the reason there was so many students per cert, but that is something that they felt was maybe a little bit high. Some successes is that the feedback from the teachers was that the teachers, they genuinely enjoyed the experience and the opportunity to participate in virtual learning. The spring was so different in that shutdown, so I think they really enjoyed being able to really see what this was all about prior to starting school, and they really felt that they were in a better position to start this virtual learning or online learning with their students come September. One of the challenges was the collaboration to create a cohesive program, because it was kind of broadly based, functional literacy, functional numeracy. They felt the more opportunity to be able to work together to create a program that was more unilateral across all of the classes would be a little bit better for them, I think, as educators. So some of the learning and informed planning that we made from this feedback was honoring the placement of students in the virtual setting, recognizing the value of class size and like-minded peers to create a caring community and safe learning environment. That was the feedback we received. We were able to create a Teams resource document to support the use of Teams for our students. Because the feedback is that the quicker they can learn how to use these tools for the online learning, the better off they'll be to be able to support the educational piece. So we wanted to, off the gate, take some of that learning from this summer and create a resource that can be used right away by our certs and sets. The other piece was continuing to use SLP and BA support to support our classes virtually. And we actually are doing that for both remote and in-class learners. So I know that we have SLP supporting classes that are in school, but they're supporting virtually. And our BAs equally are supporting our virtual students. And we've created a nice framework for their support as well. So that's been helpful to know that that was really something that parents valued. And we were able to use that and continue that in September. It also, and I think I spoke to this last time, but it also helped in our understanding of the challenges that a student with special education needs might have in attending the ministry requirements of 225 minutes. So we were able to share this communication with certs and focus on meeting the student where they were at and building up their ability to attend to the ministry mandated minutes, because we know that everyone's starting at a different point. And so we want to build up to that, but they're not always there when we start. And finally, this feedback will also support and inform any future programming for students with special education needs and or cert support we provide to summer school. So we're not sure what that will look like next year, but it will help us inform what framework we create.
Thanks, Jody.
Welcome.
And we do have some additional reports that we'll be able to share as we provide the SO report. So those were the items, and then there was a last item from our last meeting, and it was suggested that some resources be found or developed to support students who are waiting for COVID test results. And that was a really great recommendation. And our fabulous team jumped on that right away. And they have shared a YouTube video that supports a student with COVID-19 testing waiting for results. We've also created a PowerPoint on COVID testing information that's very suitable for students. And a social story was also created on waiting for COVID test results. So those were the items that were follow-up, and then I just had some new information to add as well. With regards to professional development, our gifted CLCs took place on October 13th, and the focus was for all sets, including our virtual teachers, as well as iCerts who were involved, and topics included mental health and the gifted classroom, the Minds Up program, Christian meditation. It also focused on integrated options, online coding, IEP development, and alternative programming and reporting. We also had a new training for certs that was actually held today. They focused on the administration of the CCAT, which is upcoming, CATIA, again, alternate progress reports, the IPRC process, and accessing deaf and hard of hearing itinerant supports. Our I-teams, in order to maintain and build their skills related to educational ABA, we have released 6 new training modules. We also hosted our first A4 CLC meeting that was at the beginning of the month, and this involved students or secondary special education staff, including the STC sets, life skills sets, iCerts, deaf and hard of hearing teachers or department heads and consultants. And they focused on speech and language, tips for learning and teaching in a virtual environment, best practices for remote teachers, and included new assessment materials as well. And we also had our first CLC for the essential skills class, and that was held at the beginning of October as well. And tips for teaching and learning in a remote learning environment was also a focus for this group. And there was a behavior analyst presentation around appropriate peer relationships and next steps. Just a couple updates around the virtual learning. As I mentioned, we have hired a 0.5 virtual iCert to provide support, and that person continues to support virtual teachers by offering sessions. And the BAs have also adapted their processes of transition and focus support to support our remote learners. With respect to our speech and language department, our new model of tiered support for students with FASD has launched. The SLPs have completed about 31 assessments for students on the wait list, and virtual feedback on results is ongoing. And then lastly, with respect to special events, tomorrow is Dress Purple Day. The Children's Aid Societies across the province are raising awareness about the important role that individuals and communities play in supporting vulnerable children, youth, and families. And the campaign is more important than ever since the COVID-19 pandemic has created additional stressors for families, and in some cases has increased the risk for the well-being and safety of vulnerable children and youth. And CAS is asking people to wear purple on October 27th to show children, youth, and families that they are there to help. So that is a lot of information. If there are any questions.
Thanks, Stephanie. Maria, you had your hand up?
I did, thank you. Just with respect to the feedback report that was shared about the summer learning. So I just wanted to thank the staff very much for that report. It was very thorough. And I'm guessing that's maybe going to be a new feature going forward. And I think it's great. And I think that's a good, that can be a good piece of our community consultation. And it sounds like those programs were really successful, which is fantastic. And I don't want to take away from that, but I do want to raise a concern that I did raise back in May or June. And I did follow up afterwards by email to senior staff and trustees, and I didn't get a response. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think Jody said that everyone that wanted to participate in those programs was able to do so. If I got that wrong, then please correct me. But the problem is that not everybody knew they are available, and the information didn't go out to everybody. And I know when I raised it, one of the answers was it's on the website, but parents are going to go looking for something that they don't know is there. And I know of at least a few students, life skills students, structure teaching students, whose families did not know that these programs were available. So something to hopefully consider for next year is a more pointed communication to all the students that would be eligible, to make sure that they're all aware and have an equal opportunity to apply. And maybe that means some won't get in, but at least everyone has an opportunity to apply. Sorry, was my mic off?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done. I was going to say, Jody, did you want to respond?
Hi, sorry. No, thank you, Maria, for that feedback. Yes, I know we did put it on the website as an opportunity for parents to go on. And I hear what you're saying, that they may have not have known it was there. And we did reach out to our CERTs and ask them to speak with families that they felt might be appropriate for the programming. I think some of maybe that hesitation, I guess, if you will, to more broadly, other than the board website, so it was there for everyone, is not knowing, one, if we were going to have the staff, what that program might look like. So I hear what you're saying, and we appreciate that feedback. And certainly if we're looking at this for next year, how we can more broadly, as you said, let everyone have that opportunity. As I mentioned, we did ask CERTs to reach out to families, but yeah, and it was on the board website, but we'll take that. So thank you for that information.
Thanks, Jody.
Yeah.
Diane, you had your hand up?
Yes, Brenda, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Just going back to Stephanie's comment saying about the purple day tomorrow, and that people were asked to wear purple tomorrow. Is that staff, or is that central office, or how far does that extend?
That would extend to anyone who's interested. I know that the schools have the information. It has been tweeted for the last few days on our social media. So that would extend to anyone who's interested in demonstrating that support.
So, Stephanie, it would be up to the principal as to whether or not students would participate, given the fact that our students are in uniform?
Yes, typically that's what would happen, and considerations are made for students who wear uniforms, and there are lots of days to recognize special events, and the school principal would outline what the criteria would be. So whether some schools will do, purple only on top, and they still wear a uniform bottom, but that's something that is discussed at the school level.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jody, I have a question, if that's okay, with respect to the information that you provided. So I'm just curious, there was a lot of information there, and thank you for that, because I agree. I think it's so important to get that feedback, to look at what went well and to look at where we can possibly improve. Those always help build the case for future programming. So I'm just wondering, there was a lot in there about the specialized programs that were offered this summer. Was the feedback in there also gathered from our spec ed students who just attended the literacy and numeracy programs as a spec ed student for the first time, or just the specialized programs?
Just the specialized programs.
Okay. And so the reason I ask is I think it's probably important, and it's done now. We've done it, and I'm glad we did it. But I really think, on a go forward basis, I'd be really interested to get feedback from the parent perspective on the inclusion of those spec ed students with those numeracy and literacy programs, the typical programs, because they've never been able to participate in those previously. And so this was the first year for that. So in addition to these amazing specialized programs, we also had students who were able to participate in those numeracy and literacy and helped sort of bridge those gaps, if you will, coming into the next school year. And I heard a lot of really great success. I know that staff had to come together to figure out EA allocations and cert supports, and for a number of these teachers, they had not worked with a student before that had different needs. So it was pretty awesome. So I'd be interested to get, maybe even some anecdotal feedback on the inclusion of, those students in those typical programs, because that was really exciting. I think that we were able to offer up those opportunities for those students to participate who normally would never have had that chance. And I just, I don't ever get really personal on SEAC. I try not to, but my son was one of those kids, and man, what a difference. And the feedback that we're getting from his teacher this year when he came in ready to rock and roll in September was night and day. As far as, they just said the kid just started clicking with math concepts. And I really have to attribute that to the intensive stuff that he got over the summer. And that would not have happened if we had not been able to put those supports in place. So,
I love hearing that, and that's fantastic. And I totally agree with you, Brenda, about getting that feedback as well. So that was perhaps an oversight, but being new, we were trying to figure out what do we need feedback on here. And I will just say as well that a lot of students too, so your son being able to participate, we have had actually lots of students with IEPs in these programs in the past, even in Camp Summerland, in high school credit earning, in these the grade 6, 7, 8 summer program with IEPs. However, they didn't have cert support in the program.
Right.
So they've been there the whole time, participating, learning, and then we've sort of broadened that a little bit to include other students with special education needs. And then, on top of that, being able to provide the cert support. And I do think it has made a difference. And we did, it's funny because we got the feedback from the certs from those programs and, hearing how great it went. And I could see, like, we met with them every week and we could see, their involvement, and they really were in there. Like, they were well used.
They were, and the EAs were well used, and they were instrumental as well. It was, everybody did their part.
Thanks for that feedback, and certainly moving forward, it's something we can look at too. So
yeah, great. Okay, thanks so much, Jody. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss it because I was looking for it and I didn't want to miss it, but I appreciated all of the feedback from the specialized programs, because a number of parents were also so thrilled to have the ability for their students to participate in those specialized programs over the summer. And I'd love to see that continue if we can do that. And I'm sure that Director Daly is on the call somewhere listening to that plea. So thanks, Jody. I think, Maria, did you have your hand up?
I did, thank you. You just reminded me, I know it's not spec ed specific, but hopefully somebody can answer. And as you said, I think Director Daly's here somewhere. He's been very quiet. We also had the grade 8 Reach Ahead courses this summer for the first time. So I was wondering what the uptake was like on those. Just curious about those as well. I don't know if there's anyone that can answer. Don't all jump on at once.
Is there anyone that wants to take that?
Do we want to take that away as a follow-up? Or?
Oh, Pat has not me at the moment. Is there someone else that wants to?
Could we make that a business arising question? or a follow? Yeah, or a follow-up question at least.
I can look into it, Brenda, and just, I guess I'm curious if it fell in the special education department or if it was in another area of program services.
Well, so yeah, like I said, I don't think it did fall in the special education department, but it certainly would be something that might have been of interest to our gifted students. We didn't have any gifted programs. I know some boards did offer gifted programs as part of their summer learning, but that's definitely something that could be of interest to those kids or any of our kids really that are credit earning could,
sure.
Could access.
That would just help.
It's not spec ed, it's not spec ed specific, but it again could be of interest to some of our students.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That helps narrow down where we can find the information. That's all. And I do appreciate Jody sharing that information, and we can look at the Reach Ahead. And then the other feedback that we have is feedback on the SLP program, and we also have some feedback on mental health programming that took place. So we thought we would space it out over meetings and just have some updates moving forward so we can come back with those other items at future meetings.
That's perfect. Thanks so much. Was there any other questions for Stephanie before we get to the trustee report? No. Okay, Trustee Guzzo, I believe that you're stepping in for Trustee Duarte to give the update. Is that correct?
I am.
All right, it's all yours.
Thank you. So since the last time we met, we've had two board meetings and one policy meeting. Of the items that are of importance is we are in year 4 of our strategic plan. So we're in the last year of our 4-year strategic plan. Director Daly reported that we had 2,823 stakeholders that responded to the survey this year. So this is year 4 for the report card. It is available on our website. So for those who would like to see what the results are. Also, it was part of the board package. So if anybody is interested to see, or if anybody keeps up with the board packages, his report was included in there. Other items of interest that have happened are, sorry, just give me a second because I have to switch to another screen. We had a couple of items passed at the last board meeting. One of them, Chair Agnew has reported on already, which is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. It has been passed and will be implemented for this year. We're very happy to see that. We also have some new other board motions that were passed at the last meeting, one of them being timekeeping. For those of you who have ever done delegations, or if you've listened into some of the board meetings, just to try to help keep things moving. And then other staff reports in regards to the continuation of school reopening. As you have heard Superintendent Ballo respond and talk about, and some of the things that have gone on and continue to evolve as we deal with this very different year. And lastly, in regards to the bullying prevention committee that has been struck, we have yet to meet, as I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but we have 3 new superintendents that have joined the team here at our senior management team. They are Emmy Bakaich, and her portfolio will be policy primarily. Nancy Donalfo, she will be looking after the virtual schools, and they all have families schools as well. And Anthony Cordero, he will be in charge of safe schools. So he will be the contact person from staff for the bullying and prevention committee. I will be touching base with him tomorrow afternoon to try to get some dates moving. And hopefully for the next meeting, I'll be able to report something back. All of that is respectfully submitted.
Sorry, Trustee Carabella, did you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Trustee Agnew. Thank you for the report, Trustee Guzzo. I just wanted to add another motion that was passed that
I think you're muted, Trustee Carabella.
Okay, now can you hear me? Okay, so I don't know what you heard, but I just wanted to thank Trustee Guzzo for the report, and also to say that there's another motion that was passed that I put forward, and that is that we will have now COVID-19 related financial reporting that shows our revenues from the different government funding and our expenditures, and going forward that we can budget well and see how it was used at our board. So that'll be coming up on quarterly reports. So that's all. Thank you.
I think you're muted, Brenda. It looked like you were.
You're right. Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Carabella. I appreciate that. And thank you, Trustee Guzzo, for the update. Moving on to item number 9 is our SEAC discussion. Is there any items for discussion? I feel like we've talked about a lot tonight, but is there any items there for discussion that anyone wants to bring forward?
Sorry, I just had one question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I mean, I know we have a lot on the agendas and I know we're getting into the year, but I thought normally at the beginning of the year we sort of had a goal setting exercise as well, and you know what presentations we might like to see. Maybe we have enough carried forward to that, but I think it's good because things change and there might be new topics that people might be more interested than others. I don't know. I just wanted to kind of ask about that process.
Yep. So we have, again, I think, you know, I'm not trying to use that as an excuse at all. I think, you know, the first few meetings we've been playing catch up and trying to get to some of the presentations that I know we weren't able to get to last year for a variety of different reasons, whether that was because of restrictions around everything else that was going on, or we had a strike at one point, so we weren't able to have some of our staff do presentations. And so I think, you know, from a agenda planning perspective right now, I think we're playing catch up. So, you know, we have our transition presentation finally happening next meeting, and we have a presentation from the psychology department. But yeah, I mean, you know, we can always, you're right. I think we've always had a mechanism at the beginning of the year in some capacity to bring the calendar forward and take a look and see what we have. If there's any desire for anybody to add anything to that, you know, we can do that in that formalized mechanism again. Again, I always just encourage people, if there's something you want to see added to the agenda, please feel free to go ahead and do that. But there's, you know, there's always an opportunity for us to add in some kind of goal setting there if we want. I'm really open to it, Maria. I'm open to, you know, the will of the group here. If there's something we want to have added, if we want to set some goal setting, you know, a lot of the stuff that we had done last year almost gave us enough sort of for 2 years worth of presentations between some of the topics that had come up, as well as committee, individual association presentations. So I don't think we were at sort of a gap for any topics to be able to bring forward for presentation at the meetings. But again, if we want to put an item on here that we want to do some goal setting, we can do that. It's not a problem. If people want to just give ideas that might come out of a conversation for a follow-up presentation, we can do that. So, you know, I think we're a little bit fluid on how we want to approach that. So I'm happy to hear back from our members on what you brought forward.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't have any comments in the chat right now. But, you know, like I said, Maria, please, or to everybody here, you know, please at any time feel free to bring forward an item that you want to have added to the agenda, or again, something that comes out of a discussion that we want to have, that we want to add, or anything like that. I think that sometimes some of the conversations that we have end up driving some of the things that we want to see moving forward. But again, if somebody wants to add, if we want to add on some annual goal setting, you know, not a problem to do that. I mean, that's even something that we could look at, honestly, Maria, in January, maybe get through the next, I mean, it's not the school year, obviously, but get through the next few meetings where we do have some presentations lined up, and then we can talk in, you know, maybe even in our meeting in December, but what we want to see for the second half.
Yeah, actually, as you were talking about the next couple of presentations, I was thinking maybe January is sort of a good time. And it's not that I have anything in particular that I haven't already brought up, and those two presentations I think are great. I'm interested in those, and I'm sure others are as well. But sometimes it is good to just sort of take a step back and kind of and just, you know, reorient and just make sure that this is still working, or if there's other things. And again, I don't have anything in particular. I think it's a good process. I mean, yeah, January, it's a new year at that point.
Yeah,
so that works.
Yeah, and I think we've done some things, with our agenda to try to add some things. So items like committee reports and trying to make sure we have representation there, trying to add that standing item as far as if there's any policies to review. So, I think our agenda has been, sort of a flowing, fluid, moving document. And I'm happy for that. I'm glad that we've been able to add some items to it, whether it's relevant to that particular meeting or not. We know that we have that there. And I think that that's helping to drive some further conversations. So what we can do is I'll take a look at what the December agenda looks like, and we can put an item in there where we perhaps have some conversation around some suggested topics to build the second half of our year and see what we're interested in, and then we can work on requesting those people to come in and present. Or if they aren't presentations, maybe they're, I don't know. I mean, it could be anything. It could be discussions around subcommittees, could be whatever. So I think you're right as well. That's a great time. Let's do that, and I'll make a note for us to include that in our December meeting.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Maria. Okay, so item number 10 is our next meeting. So our next agenda, the meeting will be Monday, November the 30th. And like I said, it will include a psychology department presentation from Oliver and his team, and a transitions presentation from the iCerts, which I know has been long overdue, and I'm really excited to have that transition presentation. So that'll be happening on Monday, November the 30th. And that is it for absenteeism. I have be it resolved that Marvin Dwart and Deborah Barden be excused. If I can get someone to...
I can make the motion. Brenda, it's Nancy.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So you move. Can I get a seconder? Marika, second. Thank you so much. Okay, so I just need a motion to adjourn if we are all done. Anyone? Motion to adjourn? This is usually the one everyone's jumping up to do.
I can make the motion. Does that mean we have to stay here?
What was that? I'm not staying here.
If nobody motions, does that mean we have to just...
I'll make a motion.
You guys can stay here.
Rick will motion.
Rick wants to go.
All right, so Maria, is that you making the motion? And I've got Diane seconding it.
Whatever, yeah. I think some other people put their hands up to do, or whatever.
All right, we'll assign somebody to it.
If you need me in there.
So we will go to our closing prayer. If I can get everyone to join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The prayer is here on the screen before you. So blessed are you, O God of all creation. Each day you spread before us the rich and wonderful diversity of the human family created in the divine splendor of your love. Fashioned in your image, you call us to love one another with the same tender care with which you brought us to creation. Each one of us is but one small part of the glory that is you. As we serve the students and families of the Halton Catholic District School Board on the Special Education Advisory Committee, fill us with your grace, guide us with your wisdom, and give us the strength and courage to do your work, so that it may always be said of our every act, God saw that it was good. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we will talk to everybody at our next meeting. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.